Thanks everybody for coming after lunch. My name is Brian Dannon. I'm with MindSing, and I'm an independent Drupal agency. And we work on large-scale websites, often multinational, that get a lot of traffic. This talk is called Speedy Delivery. I will have a slide that explains what all these acronyms are. We're going to talk about how to win the GTM, SERP, and CWV game with Layout Builder and Tailwind. And thank you to our sponsors, of course. And here's the first slide. So this is the core team that has helped me build out this system. Martin and Eric are colleagues that work with me from UW, not to be confused with UW, where we are here today, but the University of Waterloo. So I'm going to break this into two parts, and the first part I'm going to talk about the tag manager, third-party JavaScript, and then the second part I'll get more into the Drupal stuff. So the first part is a bit more generic, and these concepts could be applied to any web system. It doesn't have to be Drupal. So overall, we're going to talk about optimizing the web experience. This is a quick outline of what we're going to go over. We've got an introduction with some definitions. Then I'll get into the Google Tag Manager and optimizing that. And then I'll begin with part 2, which is using Tailwind and Layout Builder. And I'll talk a little bit about how this can be used for marketing flexibility. And I feel like each one of these sections, part 1 and part 2, could probably be an entire presentation in itself. So there's a lot more behind each of these concepts. And I just want to point this out because we've used this concept live in production here. And so on the top here, we have before implementing this strategy on our website, which was built in 2017. It's on Drupal 8+, now it's version 10. And then below is after we implemented these strategies. And it's just a night and day difference, especially when we look at the page weight. And then below is actually a non-production server, so that's why some of the metrics aren't as good as they turn out to be once we hit production, like our largest contentful paint score is not necessarily reflective. But the total blocking time and the page weight are the main things we're looking at as to how fast a page can load. And this is essentially the same slide where I'm comparing production before on the left-hand side and production after on the right-hand side. And this just shows that our largest contentful paint score does significantly drop. And then I point out specifically that we were able to decrease the weight of our page 90%. So we went from 2.3 megabytes down to under 0.3 megabytes in terms of loading the page. And the pages are substantially the same in the before and after, even though we changed some superficial design things. This is just another measurement before and after implementing this change using the Lighthouse tab in the Chrome browser. So when you go into the Chrome browser, you can get the Lighthouse tab, and you can actually get these Lighthouse scores. And this is how you end up getting judged. I'll go over that in a minute. But so beforehand, we had an overall score of 85, and afterwards, we're getting an overall score of 99. And if you run the Lighthouse over and over again, you'll get slightly different scores. So sometimes it's 99 and sometimes it's 100. And usually at this point, the thing blocking us from getting 100 has to do with some of the SEO structures of the page or the server response time itself. Okay, so these are the important acronyms that we're going to go over. So this is what a lot of people are probably interested in. What do these silly words mean? So SEO is search engine optimization. SERP is the search engine results page. So when we talk about improving SEO and improving SERP, the search engine results page, we're trying to get higher up on SERP. So we want to be the first item or the second item, but not the fifth item kind of thing. Or we want to raise from item 5 to item 3. And in these highly competitive spaces, if you've structured your page correctly with all your keywords and have nice semantic HTML and pictures with alt tags, what's going to keep you from being number 1 then turns into how fast does your page load using these CWV Core Web Vital scores. And these are from Google. And the most important aspects of these, well, the ones that get judged and whether or not you're going to score better than a competitor is going to be LCP, which stands for the largest contentful paint. So when the page comes into your browser and it paints itself, it's the largest piece that you see, and once that's done painting, you get your LCP, largest contentful paint score. Just recently, it's now INP, which is interaction to next paint. So that's when you can actually start to interact with the page. And just a couple months ago, it was FID, which is first input delay. And they're slightly different. You have to go into Google and find out exactly what it means. But the high level is what I just explained. And then CLS, which is the cumulative layout shift. So if your page loads and then you have CSS come in, and I'll talk about how we defer our CSS later on in the presentation, your page will shift. And if you have layout shift, it really hurts your scores. And so in these strategies, I'll talk about how we have no cumulative layout shift, CLS, and you saw in my previous slides, the implementation had no layout shift. GTM is the Google Tag Manager. That's a third-party tagging tool, so you install that onto the website. And then marketing teams can kind of just abstractly throw JavaScript on your website, and it's really great for the marketers and really horrible for our performance and potentially security. But it's how it works. You know, this is how you get your Facebook tag on there, your Pinterest tag, your Reddit tag, your A/B testing tags, and it's really easy to put all these tags on there. OneTrust is our privacy federation tool. So you can use any kind of, this is like the pop-up that says, you know, do you want to accept the cookies or do you want to block the cookies? So we're going to use our OneTrust privacy federation to sort of tell Google Tag Manager what it's allowed to load. So to get started on this with GTM, the Google Tag Manager, we're going to build an afterload event in really basic JavaScript. So when you're using GTM and you go and you install GTM onto your website, you have to add a data layer object, which is just kind of like an empty JavaScript object. So you use JavaScript and you're like, create this data layer. And GTM assumes this exists and Google tells you how to do it. And it's pretty straightforward and easy. And then you've got this data layer, and it just has all these events that get pushed into there from GTM and all these other third parties. And all these other third parties, they just assume, and they're like, okay, you've got the data layer object. And when you look at the console, you've got data layers. So, and then I'll talk about two different types of privacy. One is the European style, which is an opt-in version. And I tend to think that this is a better model than the American style. American style is like, we're just going to do it to you and ask for your permission later. So the American style of adding third-party tracking to our websites, you opt out. And it is changing, so that's the other thing. Like in California, there's different privacy models, and then in other states, they're slowly implementing them. The most conservative approach is the European style, where you have to ask for permission before you put these things onto the web page. So I'm going to go with that assumption. It's just a lot better in my opinion. Marketers like the American style because you can just track everybody all willy-nilly and you get a lot better tracking data. It's a lot harder to do what I'm going to talk about with the American style. So I'm going to just kind of go forward talking about the European style. Otherwise, you have to do this like on a tag-by-tag basis. So tag managers add a lot of page bloat, which I kind of already explained. You're just throwing third-party JavaScript into the page. And the way GTM asks you to install it is you put it in the head of the website. and it's supposed to block everything else. And the tag manager by itself is fairly lightweight, so it doesn't affect the page load too badly. It would be better if you don't do that, and you could potentially even delay GTM, which would be even better. A lot of these tags also assume that, hey, we're going to do stuff to your website before it loads in, a lot of these A/B testing tools, for example, and that's really going to hurt our page performance. So we'll kind of go forward pretending like we don't need to block any of the page loading. And you can work with your marketing teams to say, well, why don't we not block our page loading so we can have better search engine result page rankings. You know, I'm using like ChatGPT to create some of these images, and it was really, really hard to get a crappy image. And you know, I'd be remiss to have a presentation nowadays that doesn't talk about AI, so here it is. And you know, I was trying to get like a little kid version drawing of the picture, and so in the end, like this is a 6-year-old version of a pig. I had my daughter actually draw this one for me, and this was the worst looking pig I could get out of ChatGPT, and I kept telling it like, no, I want it to look like a 2-year-old, and anyways, it cannot do crappy things. So I thought that was kind of funny. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about how we can use consent and really hone in on privacy to optimize our page load experience. And I'll focus on OneTrust. You can use any sort of like privacy consent management tool. OneTrust is kind of the best known, and most big corporations kind of already have OneTrust. You could even just do this on your own. You don't even need a third party. And they would, in theory, all work the same. But I have the most experience with OneTrust. The big corporations I work with all seem to be using OneTrust. And I've talked about this afterload event that I'll get into a little bit more detail here, and we're going to use that as the basis to fire our privacy consent as the first thing that we do. This is the afterload event. So you can see this is a fairly simple script that one of the developers I work with on one of my projects just kind of wrote this, and oh, yeah, that's a great idea. So you can see we have our data layer object, and we just push this event into the data layer that's called afterload, and we just made up that name. And then it's got a timeout, and in our timeout here it's 2500, and that's milliseconds, so that's 2.5 seconds. We found that if we wait 2.5 seconds, it's anything that loads after that, the Core Web Vital score that decides what you're going to be ranked on in Google has already, you know, the score has been written down. And now anything you do to your page, it doesn't count anymore. So, and sometimes I use like 3500, which is 3.5 seconds. And you want a middle ground because I think it has to be after 2 seconds, or you're going to end up having problems by having your CWV scores drop. But if it's too long, then it's too much of a delay for your end user. And then this is the delay that will delay the little consent bar from OneTrust. So this is a trigger. I'm not going to get like too much into how GTM works. And this is kind of what I was saying at the beginning, where this GTM stuff by itself could easily be a full hour plus presentation on how to do this, how to configure it, how to get it to work. So this will be kind of like a quick, like, here's some GTM stuff that if you already know how to use GTM, this can be really helpful. So, and this slide right here, so here's our afterload event that fires OneTrust. And so you can see we create this custom event, and this is a trigger in GTM. And we're just looking for the event that gets put into the data layer that's called afterload. And so that's what I have in my screenshot here on the left. And this is the trigger that fires our OneTrust script. So here on the right, this is what we were given from OneTrust, that this is OneTrust, and that pops up the privacy banner. So what we're going to do is we're going to federate all of our tags through OneTrust, which is really what should be done anyway. There's an event that OneTrust automatically puts into the data layer for you, and when you read through the OneTrust documentation on how to install OneTrust and get it working, I'm just following what they tell you to do on their website. This isn't a secret or anything. The OneTrust groups updated is the event that they push in there, and what that does is it's the event that's registered when people click on the button, whether it's reject or accept. The OneTrust groups updated fires into there. So we've got this trigger that we've created that looks for that event to be added to the data layer. And then we use that in a trigger group. So you create these other triggers in GTM that are called groups, where you can combine triggers and their AND operators. So we need to make sure that the OneTrust groups updated event has occurred. And we need to make sure that the category that the tag is inside of is accepted. Because you can go in, you can say, don't accept these, but yes, accept these. So that's what this OneTrust active is. And here is the OneTrust active trigger itself that's inside of that group, because the group on the right here lets us know that the button's been interacted with by the user. And then when you're in OneTrust, there's a place where you can categorize all your cookies, and you can give them whatever categories you want to have. But there's a standard like 3 out of the box that kind of all of your cookies will be in. And it's like targeting, analytics, functional, and strictly necessary. I think there's 4 groups that, but you could have like 20 more groups, and you can just name them whatever you want, and they all kind of like show up, and then they get an ID. So here's the ID, and then it's just another custom event with this regular expression matching. It's like, okay, category 4 here, this is targeting, and here's the group that will let this tag fire because it's a targeting tag. I don't have enough time to get into the specifics of more details of how to do that, but that's just kind of how it works. And the point of this whole concept, though, is we're waiting to load. So every single tag that we fire has to be triggered by one of these groups, so that no tags in your GTM can fire at all until OneTrust groups updated has occurred. And OneTrust groups updated cannot occur until this afterload event has happened. And it's that delay that stops all of that stuff from getting onto the screen until your CWV score has been measured and recorded, and then you are in the decision for what rank you're going to be on your web page. So just really quickly, that's kind of what we're doing and how we get GTM out of the way so that it's not lowering and impacting our score negatively. But we still get to use GTM, and the marketers get to have all their stuff happening. And even better, when you do it this way, your privacy and consent is following the law, so you will lower your corporate liability, and your lawyers will hopefully be happy about that if they know what you're talking about. So these are just some added bonuses that really help for our CWV scores, and it's where we add prefetch and preload into the head tag of our website. So it's this DNS prefetch where we want to prefetch the Google Tag Manager itself, and then the tag manager itself with the GTM ID, you want to preload that as a script. When you put these into the head of your document, the website HTML, it's like, this is the stuff that we're about to load, so make sure it's all ready, and it eliminates an extra paint cycle so that you get a bonus on your CWV score. You need to do this with all of your above the fold images as well. And actually, in my original slides where I showed you the before and after, the LCP score that I was showing was actually lower than it ended up being because I hadn't done this fetch priority stuff that I have in blue here yet. I had missed this, and then when I added it in, my LCP time dropped significantly because it eliminates a paint cycle. So in the head, you need to add the preload and fetch priority with the path to your image. And this is where Drupal is like really wonderful. You're using Drupal image fields and image styles so you can know what the path is exactly, and you can add that into your head. And I could get into more details on that, but I don't have time at the moment. in the body of your web page where the image tag actually is. One thing that helps a lot with these scores is having the width and the height written in. Again, this is where Drupal comes in with their image fields and their image styles. You will know what those are, especially if you've written the image styles yourself and you tell it what to be. But you can also use pre-processed functions or twig and just measure it and write that in. And then you just have to add this attribute to the image tag that says fetch priority equals high. And when you add the preload and the fetch priority high to the image, both in the head and the image itself, suddenly your LCP score is like much better. So I thought that was kind of cool. It made a big noticeable difference. Yeah.
You know how that works with the source set tag? So if you're doing responsive images, is it just applied to the main tag and then it figures it out from there?
Yeah, so what I did is inside of source set, I've got like an object and it's got multiple like images. But I think there's like just one image tag inside of source set.
Yeah.
And so you just do it with the image tag inside of that source set in the in this model.
And it's grabbing the width and height then from your fallback.
Yeah, from that fallback, because the image tag inside a source set will have the width and height in there.
Interesting note about the fallback image. If you don't apply the patch that's in the Drupal core queue right now, it selects it based on alphabetical order rather than on your fallback value. So I highly recommend applying that patch.
Good God.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, so I guess there's just for the recording, I guess there's a patch that's important for the
It's
source set.
to 10.4.
And it's inside of 10.4. Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, at least we'll be there by default soon. Okay. So that was like a quick whirlwind of, how to improve your GTM to greatly modify and improve your SERP score rankings and everything. And what's really nice about that is you can, if you're using GTM already, that's just something you can hopefully begin to implement and see results with whatever you've got going on, whether it's Drupal or not. You can do that on any website, especially if it's already using GTM. So now we get into some cool stuff that we can do in Drupal. This stuff can also get kind of complicated, so I'm going to try to show it from a fairly high-level point of view that might be the most useful if you're doing a brand new site, but at the same time, what I had showed is implementing it into an already existing site, and I'll talk a little bit about how that works as well. Okay, so I actually put all of my work that I did to get this set up into this GitHub, so you can scan this QR code if you'd like, and you can go and download the code repo if you want. It's using DDEV, and I've got a snapshot in there with a database, and then you can actually load this project up and begin to see how it works. And we'll probably keep modifying it because I didn't really get all the way done with it. Some of my layout builder stuff is not configured as user-friendly as I would really like it to be. Oh yeah, and then some skills that will help with this is if you're familiar with Node and NPM, Webpack, Tailwind, and Post CSS, that'll be really helpful. But I'm not even the best at some of those things. They're kind of hard, still figuring them out. It also helps a lot if you understand pretty fundamentally how Twig works using extend and library attach. To use the repo, you've got to use DDEV or know how to take a DDEV project and work with it. We also rely heavily on a parent-child theme inheritance. Okay, so this is a quick way that we set this up is we're going to end up having two themes, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. And we're going to have one theme that's given to anonymous users, people who are not logged in, and that's going to be a sub-theme of the main theme. And the main theme is going to be given to authenticated users that are logged in, that are doing authoring. But the real goal here is to have our anonymous theme not load anything, well, as little as possible. We want to have as few server calls as possible. Every single time you ask for another asset, it's a negotiation that has to occur, and it slows down the entire system. So we want to eliminate that. Ideally, it would be one load. You can't really do it. I have haven't been able to do it in less than like 3 or 4 items that will load. We're going to kind of remove all the stuff that Drupal puts in there, the CSS and JavaScript. We're going to write as much style as we can directly into the HTML. And we're only going to use plain JavaScript. We're actually going to write our font files into the HTML as well with base64 encoded strings. This is where I talk about splitting the theme into 2. So we're going to have a main theme. I don't like to use base themes because they have all this stuff and I don't know what's happening. I want to have like full control over every single line of HTML on the website. And if speed is the priority, like, this is really helpful. We're going to create a sub-theme of the main theme, and we're going to override some of the libraries, just turn them off. And we're going to tell the view which theme to load using this theme rule module. That's really awesome. So we can say, if you're an anonymous user, load the anonymous theme. And otherwise, it's going to use the default theme. And this is how we did it as well. So using theme rule, we created a new content type on our existing site, and only the new content type uses the new theme, so that this way our like 4,000 pages that were on the old theme are unaffected. And then we can slowly begin to implement the new theme like 1 page at a time. This is the theme rule, administrative theme, where we add a rule, and it's for this anonymous theme, and we tell it like anonymous users use the anonymous theme. We're going to override the HTML template. I've got some screenshots of what this looks like in a little bit. So we've got an HTML.html.twig, and that's where most of the magic is going to occur, where we're writing a lot of stuff in a different way in the anonymous theme than the authenticated theme. And we will defer the non-critical CSS file. So if you go to web.dev, which is Google's like CWV documentation hub of how to do things the way they want them to do, they tell you how to defer the CSS file. So we're going to get everything to load in the initial HTML, like when it comes on in. We're going to get our scores, and then we're going to add the other CSS and JavaScript. Oh yeah, I've got a QR code later on in my presentation that talks about the structured data from Google. I like to get all of my node fields based on what Google wants to see in structured data. That's going to be an additional SEO boost if you can get your structured data correctly for all of your pages. So this is how I end up writing the non-critical CSS, is I kind of do a custom implementation. So I've got my main CSS file. I throw a timestamp on here so it will invalidate the caches. And then I write it the way that Google tells me to write it, which is this link to the style sheet. And this defers that style sheet. And when this style sheet loads in, you see all the any styles in there will like pop into place. So if you had all of your styles in here, it just loads like a blank black and white thing, and then boom, everything pops into place, which is really bad for the CLS. So that's why we need to have our other file, which I'll get into in a minute. And okay, so we're going to have 2 different types of CSS files using Tailwind. And this is kind of where like the real magic comes in. And this concept could be extended to make things even lighter. Right now we're just using 1 critical CSS file and 1 main CSS file. But this concept could be broken down where you could have multiple CSS files for different content types, for example. And I'm sure it could be abstracted even more, but this seems to be good enough for us for now. So in Tailwind, we have this critical CSS file, and we're going to load the Tailwind, the config for critical.js, and that's what's over here on the left. And the main thing is we have this prefix directive, and we have our main config file that is like the kitchen sink of Tailwind. So we just got this directly from Tailwind, which is why we're saying we're going to require that. It's going to have everything in there that we need. And then this one has the prefix CRT, so that when we use either in the markup or the file itself the CRT dash prefix, it's going to write it to this file. And utilities has to be on the bottom. So the file kind of has to be structured this way, where we tell what the config is, we put the base, the components, and then we write our styles that we need in here using apply functions. And then utilities is kind of what plugs it all together and makes it work. And so you can see here is some of the styles we write into our twig files. And they all have the CRT. And this is going to push it into that separate critical.css file. We're going to inline this into our twig. So here is what we write into twig, is we have our style tag in twig, and then we include this file, the critical CSS, directly. I always like to put this ignore missing equals true, because if you don't have this ignore missing equals true in your twig include, it just gives you like a 500 error, white screen of death situation. So when you add this, like let's say you forgot to compile your CSS and this file is missing, it'll still be okay even though it won't look right. At least it will load. And then this is our main CSS file, and so you can see it's almost exactly the same, except it does not have the prefix. So that here we can use just the regular Tailwind classes that don't have the CRT dash at the beginning of them, and it'll write into the main CSS, and then these will be defer loaded below the fold. And so, this is what we include in the twig file, is this file here. So we create this file that I showed earlier, and then we include it in twig. So this is something else that you could do separately from all of this. This was like the first thing I did when I started going down this path, was instead of calling fonts from a third-party server or from my own file system, I'd base 64 encode them and then write them directly into the HTML. It makes your HTML bigger, but you got to load this stuff anyway. And by avoiding extra server calls, whether they're your own local files or third-party files, that's a win. I also recommend having a maximum of 3, if possible, font weights, and that's what Google recommends. Here I'm showing 4 font weights. The fewer fonts you load, the better. These even as base 64 strings are fairly large.
Brian,
yeah.
You experimented with SVG and this strategy, because SVG sometimes fonts don't match up.
SVG fonts?
It's SVG images, which really aren't images.
Oh, you mean like inlining them like this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, we do often write SVGs in this kind of same way directly into the HTML, because then you can manipulate them too with CSS classes directly, and if they're not written directly into the HTML, you can't do that so much. You end up with a different bottleneck in that setup though, where, because the SVGs tend to be heavily nested, and you get dinged if you have too many DOM nodes. So every tag is a new node. And I found that my inline SVGs are the primary culprit for having an overload of DOM nodes. So it's again another one of these balancing acts. This is what we end up getting at the end, is the style is written directly into the HTML. So here I went to the page source to get this screenshot. So I loaded the website, went to the page source on the browser, and this is what I see written into the HTML as, this is my critical CSS here, and then these are my font files. And then when we go into production, we run all of this stuff that Drupal does, where it aggregates and minifies, and npm is running the production script, so this actually all gets pushed into one line, because the fewer lines you have, the better your page load is. So I'll talk about this a little bit. So this is my anonymous theme when I actually load everything. And I'm going to talk about how to remove, like this gets added by layout discovery. And we can actually remove that as well and have even fewer things load. So here we have our admin libraries and our main theme. I've got this admin library, so I can just have some like admin styles, which is how I style my like edit tab and things like that I only want in my main theme, but not in my anonymous theme. And I just want to show like this is all the stuff that Drupal is loading, which is really quite useful for your authors. If you want to be able to like edit your pages and you know have your toolbar and all the stuff that Drupal lets you do as an author, you need all this stuff. But like my anonymous users don't need any of that, so I turn it all off. And that's what this libraries override lets us do. So here we have our anonymous theme, and I can show this in some more detail directly in a little bit. And we're extending our main theme, and then I've established different blocks inside of the twig. So when I extend this, I can rewrite those blocks in a different way. So over here in my main theme, I'm attaching multiple libraries, but in my anonymous theme, I'm not including the admin library. So this is just an example of how to provide some libraries to the authenticated version of the theme and then different libraries to the anonymous version of the theme. And then this also shows, you know, here we're directly inlining that CSS file by using the include. And then here in the footer, I've actually just commented out this JS bottom placeholder, which is where a lot of stuff gets jammed in from Drupal that I had a really hard time removing, and I found that this was the most effective way to remove it is just not load it, so I commented out. And then actually the JS placeholder, this is typically in the head, so when you grab the HTML file from core, this JS placeholder is in the head. And what's important here, I can show this real quick. In my library file, for this to work, you have to end up putting like header true on any of your JavaScript that you want to load through your libraries. Because I'm not loading the footer library anymore. So this, to me, sometimes I forget to do this. I'm like, why won't my JavaScript load? And it's because, oh right, I turned off the footer JavaScript because it's got too much extra stuff being thrown in there. And then once I say to put it in the head, then it's here, but I've already rewritten it to the footer in my theme. So, because I load this at the bottom. Yeah.
That hasn't blown up any like modules performances for you? Because I feel some modules will be jamming their JS into the footer.
I haven't had an issue with it.
Okay.
Yeah, so like on my other site, I've got a bunch of modules, and the ones I need all work. And you know, it's a site that I built originally in 2017, so I don't even know. I can't keep track anyway of all the modules. I mean, I do know because they're written in my composer file, but. Okay, so I was like one of the ones that got added, right? This one call that I showed earlier. Like I was like, I don't need that CSS file. If I want to like limit stuff, I'll just write my own Tailwind, use my own classes, use my own CSS, and I want it to be done in my way. I don't want this extra file loading. So in my anonymous theme, I put like another like, don't load that file for me. So I went into the module itself and found, you know, oh, there's the one call CSS that was loading that I showed in my previous screenshot. So this is in layout discoveries one call, so I know what to name it. Layout discoveries one call, and I just say false. And then when I reloaded my page, it's not there anymore. It's only loading the things I want to load. And this is kind of what I was talking about. Like, there's only so many. The fave icon, unfortunately, has to be loaded as a separate file. I was never able to figure out how to inline that. I don't think you can, based on the HTML spec. And then we do need some extra CSS, so we defer load that, and we defer load the JavaScript that I wrote. So this was the QR code that I said was coming up earlier in my presentation, and this is a link just to this here. But oops, So the structured data from Google is like a really excellent way to structure what fields you want to have in your node. And so you decide what kind of a page it is. Like most of the pages are probably going to be an article, but a lot of times you'll have like a product. And you can't just go to schema.org because schema.org has like tons of structures, but Google only supports like 10 structures. So you really got to use the ones from Google and the way Google wants them to be done. And Google also has like validators, and you got to use Google's validators. I've often had times where I've got schema markup on my page that validates in schema.org, but then does not validate in Google. And if it doesn't validate in Google, you don't get the benefit on your search results. And Google likes to say that if you follow these rules for schema, they've got some examples of companies that did this, and they saw like a 20 or 30% increase in search-based traffic because they use structured data, this schema.org kind of stuff. And this just lets you know what kind of fields you're going to need. So, the name is required. The author is optional, but helpful. And inside of the author, you can have like a link to that node if you want to style those out too. The description is required. So you can end up getting these scripts to also write directly line into your HTML markup, which would be yet another win for it getting placed high on the search engine rankings. So I like to use node fields, and I use my node fields that I decide what they're going to be based on these Google schema structures. And then I have those as node fields, and I try to get those to all lay out using the critical CSS as the above-the-fold experience. So the above-the-fold experience is going to be like the global navigation with your logo at the top. It's going to be like your H1, which is probably the name of the page, and then maybe a subheader or the description, so a little paragraph, and then an image. And so there's only so much stuff you can put in the above-the-fold experience, but you try to have enough but not too much, and then that's all what the critical CSS is. And then everything below that we'll put in using Layout Builder. So we've got node fields when you push edit on your node, and you write out those required fields. And then you go into Layout Builder and you build the rest of the page below that, and everything below that using blocks with Layout Builder will use the non-prefixed CSS classes so that it goes into the deferred CSS. And that's what this talks about, the layout blocks below the fold. We created this module, Eric specifically, who I noted at the beginning was part of the team. He created this module called Node Field Values. And this lets us access the node object. And if you go to the module and read about how it works, I can show how it works a little bit. And then when we go into doing this presentation more, like we're going to try to do this presentation at DrupalCon, we'll be able to talk about this more intelligently, mostly because I expect Eric will be there, and he wrote the module, and he knows exactly how it works, and I don't yet. I kind of know how it works. But it's really useful because we get all the node values as variables, and then we can write those node values directly into our layout builder blocks. And we've got tokens, for example. So we've got like a product name on a page, and we want to use that same product name in our layout below the fold because we talk about that product a lot in a lot of different ways. And, maybe the product name changes instead of, we had one product that keeps changing its name. It's insurance for handy people, and so it was called Handyman Insurance, and then we changed it to Handy Person Insurance, but then the SEO team was like, nobody searches for handy person, everybody searches for handyman, so we had to change it back again. So having that kind of variable is really helpful because we use that term like 20 times on the page, so we can just set that in a node value at the top, and then it populates throughout, and that's where this project came. So, like I said, there is more to come. And each section, like the GTM section and then the layout builder section, I mean, I only got to like half the layout builder section, really. And I didn't get to a lot of the stuff that makes layout builder easier to use and more effective in these kind of ways from an author's point of view. I really just wanted to talk about page performance because that's what defines where you're going to show up in your search rankings. So we'll expand on this and maybe break it into 2 distinct presentations. This presentation, I've got a link to it if you want to just like go look at all of these slides. I believe this will work. That's the idea anyway.
It loads.
Okay, great. And then, I've got this survey. It would be really cool if people like filled it out and aren't too harsh. But I mean, I've got thick skin, but you know, it's a very short survey. And the main thing I want to get out of the survey, though, I'm kind of trying to come up with different titles for this for DrupalCon. I was told that whether or not your presentation makes it into DrupalCon is like 90% what your title is. So I put like 4 different options of new titles that I might change the name of this to, and so including a write your own. So I don't know. That could be helpful for me. And so I've got like a little bit of time. I wanted to specifically have this presentation be the length it is, so that we could have question and answers. I can show some stuff directly if people are interested. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask. So you have your header up top and all the kind of the molecules that live in your header.
Mm-hmm.
How are you writing the sort of Tailwind includes to those files and still like marking those as CRT? Because I figure you're probably doing it in like a SAS file, or are you writing it right there in an actual twig?
We write a lot of it gets written directly into the twig, and I don't have it in this project exactly, but because it's more in my other project. Let's see if I can get this one up here, but I have to then probably load it as well. As I get that up, I can potentially like field another question. Yeah, because that is a good question, but like for the most part, we end up writing it into yeah. So this is an example of an actual file that we're loading. So you can see this one is prefixed with CRT. This is this image that gets loaded above the fold. And so in the twig itself, most of our classes are CRT prefixed.
And sorry, so how is Tailwind reading those if they're not already like in an HTML class? I mean, do you have like a helpers file that you're pointing to that has all these in it, or you can set Tailwind up to read into that line?
Yeah. Let me see. Do I get
Sorry, this is very in the weeds. I apologize.
Oh, that's fine. I could show. So here's like the main Tailwind config that is just like directly from Tailwind, and like this file tells it which classes are available. So this is kind of like the kitchen sink, and it's only going to write what it sees. And here under content of this file, this is like the only place where I've actually, well, I've modified a couple things in this file, but not very much. But this is like the main thing, like this content, is it looks into my CWV theme at all of the twig and JS files.
But how does it know to read between those single quotes? Normally if you write like class equals whatever, Tailwind is smart enough to read, but do you have some other, I'll ask you.
No, it just, because those things are in there, it just seems to know.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Like I think it just
reads.
reads.
You have the prefix set or something like that.
Yeah, it just reads through the markup and it says like, oh, it's like there's a Tailwind class. I don't know if it necessarily has to be inside of class.
Okay.
I don't know enough about Tailwind to speak too intelligently on it though.
Yeah, we just use it blind. So, above the fold, below the fold, what defines the space for the fold?
It's predominantly going to be like your emulator stuff. And most of the scores now are mobile, right?
Yeah.
So when you use like the Chrome emulator. This is Firefox, so it doesn't have the same ones, but for the most part, it's going to be the things in the Chrome emulator. Oh, and I did want to point that out, that using Firefox is much better to sort of like see what's going on when you look at the network tab, because no matter what Chrome browser you're using, it's got like 20 more JavaScript random things that it's constantly like loading. So when you look at your network tab in Chrome, it's hard to figure out what you're doing in terms of exactly what you're loading. So when you use Firefox, it only tells you the things are actually loading, which is nice.
Yeah. So okay, so I make a page and I just look at it, this emulator. Anything I see in that box is above the fold.
Yeah, well, and it's a lot of it as well is the Lighthouse. Let's see, is like the Lighthouse score as well. So, and that kind of tells you. So here, when you open up your DevTools and you go into Lighthouse and you push Analyze, this is the best place to tell where the above the fold is actually happening, because it gives you like the mobile view here that it's measuring.
I have to look at it myself too. It said something about something within scroll view.
Yeah.
As soon as the page loads, is my understanding.
Yep.
By the way, when I look at my usage statistics, far more people use the desktop.
Yeah, Google doesn't care how many people actually use like the desktop versus the mobile, because Google's going to judge you on the mobile score anyway.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I know a lot of these sites with tons of data that are, government and things like that are mostly desktop user based, but your SEO score is still going to be based on mobile anyway, even if 95% of your traffic is desktop.
So,
Yeah.
so speaking of Google, I've been doing this for quite a while, and it seems like their standards change so much on how to improve their scores. How do you keep abreast of, like you were talking about, we'll do 2,500 because they do the CWV at this point, but that's always a moving target with Google. Like even the mobile thing is a moving target. How do you keep abreast of like getting your site to be up to date with whatever the latest and greatest is to meet these metrics for Google?
Yeah, I mean,
They do seem to change.
that's a great question. I mean, Google Developer has a blog that people tend to frequent to see, what changes are coming. One of my clients has an SEO agency, and they tell me. But it's really hard because like this INP versus FID change.
That was a change.
But Google announced that it was changing, I guess, in like January, and they're like, this is changing, and then it didn't actually change until like July or something. So even though they're like, hey, this thing is coming and it's changing and it's a big fundamental change, and they're like, it's happening now, and then it didn't actually happen for like 7 months. So
Because I've had a client where Google came out with something new and all of a sudden their SEO just dropped because what you were doing before worked, but if you didn't like keep abreast and didn't update accordingly, your scores went down because this client, this was years ago, they didn't have like a mobile site, and so it was good when it was desktop. So it's kind of like that, right?
And then this as well, like ran this score, and it's like, why am I not doing well? It's because I've got total blocking time. There's very little happening on this, and like I'm not even sure where the script could possibly. Oh, this Chrome extension. This is kind of what I'm talking about. Like Chrome just puts stuff into your browser kind of randomly. So I think if I were to do this in probably an incognito window, it would work more effectively. I don't really have time for that, but that's another thing. When you run these Lighthouse things, open a new incognito window to run them, so you don't like. That's the main reason I got a bad score here, is these random extensions apparently. So. Awesome. Well, that's our time. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.